and friends. I'm so happy to be a moderator for a wonderful book called Bhagwan Ke Pakwan by a very young and promising author, Varun. I want to tell you a story to know your author because he is so young. He has written only 2 books so far, and out of which we are going to talk about his first book. The story of this young, shy boy goes back 25 years ago. Born and brought up in Texas, he speaks Hindi with an American accent, but his soul is totally Indian. He had a degree in finance, worked as a consultant with an international firm, and whatever we think a man is supposed to do at the age of 25, he was doing all that. But he was not happy. He was making good money, he had good life, good friends, and that restlessness took him to a different direction in his life. He quit his job, which I think people of my generation would have never dared to do. Because in your life, first you settle yourself financially as a boy, and then you concentrate on your other stuff like writing and all that. But in spite of having a good financial background and a good job, he decided to quit. And I think that decision has made him what he is today. He traveled all over the world. He worked as a bartender. He worked in a cow farm. He went to France, taught them English and learned French cooking from them in free. Because that's the typical Bania attitude, that's what he told me. And I think that was smart. Then he decided to come to India because he felt India is the right place where he would connect with whatever he wants to do in life. He's a foodie, and that's why the name of his book is Bhagwan Ke Pakwan. He met a very interesting photographer in Delhi, and both of them had one goal in life to do something different. And that's how they traveled to the northeast region of India, like Meghalaya, West Bengal, Jagannath Puri, and even to Gujarat. And what they did was, they went for the Bhagwan ka bhog, jaise what you call it, and the history, the faith, the beliefs that go with it. In India, there are few places where you will always notice they are famous. Like if you say Tirupati, we say, Tirupati ke laddu, because it's a known fact. If you go to Rajasthan, like Natwara, the prasad is called Thor. So we are all aware of this because they are very popular places where the prasads are known all over India. But he ventured into a state which was totally untouched, and he has come out with such interesting write-ups about the food they serve. Like in some places, a rice wine is served as a bhog, which for a staunch Hindu will be a very difficult idea to digest. But let me tell you, there is a place in Rajasthan, Nagaur, where a dairy is offered country liquor every day. And if she brings that, that means your wish is fulfilled. And if she rejects that, that means she is not interested in you. So such is the faith in India about the prasad. And he has taken a new dimension, new exposure to the term Pakwan. And that's why I felt that I'm very lucky to interview and introduce to you a young shy boy from Texas, but now settled in Delhi, and he is doing what he wants to do. And let me remind you, friends, it requires a lot of courage to quit something, which any young boy would dream of, and venture into something, some unknown territory, and make a success of it. He is the winner of 2 Goodman Award, which this is the award, which is an international award, and he has won in two categories. That is one first cookbook, and second, the peace cooking. I don't know what it means. Even he doesn't know what it means. But we will talk about it when we invite. So now let me present to you the young and the shy and the very talented author. Now, first I want to ask you.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Very helpful.
I want to start with the very basic question. How was the transition from a financial consultant to a book writer?
It was pretty long. It was pretty difficult. I think what any author, any writer will tell you is that there's a journey that begins before a book, and there's a journey that happens after a book. Where Bhagwan Ke Pakwan started for me was a very personal journey. When I quit my job, I was going through what we call the millennial existential crisis. We millennials, we're not patient enough to wait for the midlife crisis anymore. So we're starting early, and we have the quarter life crisis. So what I was going through was that I wasn't happy with the work I was doing. And I knew there was something about food that's always interested me. And I felt that ambiguity about I wanted to know more about food meant more to me than the certainties in life, like job and stability and everything. So I started traveling, I picked up odd jobs along the way, but food was just a part of the journey, and I think it was also, as a lost soul, you're also searching for meaning in life, you're searching to understand how does an individual make a mark and share stories, and I think as an introvert, food was a way of me connecting with people. I speak about this in India. I mean, what better way is there to spend time with friends and family than going to a restaurant, sharing in biryani, sharing in poha, sharing in breakfast. Nagpur, we got such a warm welcome. My family has fed me non-stop. From yesterday to today, from Banda to poha to thalis. And so I'm just honored that food is a way of communicating with people around you. And for the book, it became food and faith, and how can we tell the story of these things together?
Yeah, I think he is absolutely right when he said in India we connect with food. Let me tell you, in India everybody is a foodie. No matter you are a corporate boss or you are a teenager, you are a small child, everyone is so demanding about the different tastes and dishes. And the mother really has a hard task to fulfill their appetite. And very interesting about Indian people, like you go for a reception or for a wedding, people will forget the hospitality, they will forget, the decoration, so many other things. But if the food is bad, they will never forget that. And next time, after 10-15 years, if the same house has some wedding again, they will say, "Ghar se khana kha ke chalo." They serve very bad food. So much food is involved in our life. And prasad or bhog, I think they are associated right from our childhood. When you go for the exams, your dadi says, "Beta, thoda prasad de ja, paper acha jayega." And we take that, and we feel, yes, suddenly you get motivated and you feel, yes, I'm prepared for this exam. So that was wonderful, and you could connect so well with people through food. Now, when you started your journey, why did you choose northeast of India?
So for us, it became a matter. We started off with 30 places. Even in the book, I mean, we've covered only a fraction of what there is to cover when it comes to food and faith in India. We actually have a short video. Can we play that really quick?
Sorry?
A short video to play.
So if I will tell you the story of this village. For though it was not called Homicide, it was called Paham Imupi. It is the place where natural fire occurs and burned the houses from the residents due to provoke the actions of spirits. That's what we believe, huh? And there is part of the food of the gods. Dr. Trump also simply is the library. The Christianity came to Marines in 1890 through the Society of the Divine Savior. And people first of all narrated that story. See which life here is miserable. So that people really like to be part.
That's fine. Great. Yeah. Cool. So what it was these stories that we could find around India. And I'll go through the places really briefly, but each of these places had not only something so captivating in terms of the food that they ate, but the history and the culture that surrounded these dishes. That was the truly interesting part. In Meghalaya, you have a tribe. They're on the cusp of losing what was their indigenous culture, right? As they move to modern times. I think anyone in the world, you see how people live in modern societies, you want it, right? And it's really natural to maybe leave that tribal culture behind. So they're really wrestling with how to preserve that past, as well as see what the future lies for them. So it was amazing. They took us in for a weekend. We stayed with them in the tribe. They first started off with the indigenous ceremony, where they sacrificed a chicken, offered it to their gods, and as you saw, rice beer is very important to them. Why rice beer though? Because rice is such a central ingredient for the culture. And that's my favorite line actually, rice beer, you will not get drunk, you will only get lively. And I can tell you for the 4 days that we were there, we did not have water, we only had rice beer.
So I think many of us would like to go there and personally see the process of making rice beer and have a taste, because you don't get drunk.
Yeah, so just lively.
Yeah.
So a brief introduction to the places that we went to. So this is the Karbi tribe. They have an indigenous faith. They're moving towards Christianity. And everything is very much sustained within that village, from the rice beer to even the cooking utensils. You might have seen in the video, they cook within bamboo as one of the central ways of getting to cook the preparation of the meals. Then we went to Gujarat, and it's like a small, sleepy town on the coast with Vada. Yeah. And yeah, we had time to spend with Hirvad Hafiram, who taught us about the Zoroastrian faith, as well as how the Zoroastrian dishes have blended with what people were eating in Gujarat.
Yes.
So such dishes as boy, and one of our favorite characters was Vinod Bhai. Someone like me, he had an engineering background. He quit his job, and now he makes ice cream out of a rickshaw, and he drives around town feeding it to people. So this town has an amazing charm and like a vibrant vibe to it. Apart from that, we went to Jagannath. People might be familiar with this, but the Chappan Bhog, the 56 dishes that are prepared daily for Lord Jagannath. This chapter is interesting because you can't actually take photography inside the temple grounds. So we had to do, so we had to do a lot of jugaad to actually convince the chefs to come to another temple and cook for us. So we could learn the dishes, learn the ingredients. And so beser, hotel paneer, and obviously all the amazing dishes that they have. What's really cool about the food that you eat here is what they want to do is not actually change dishes how they were prepared in the past. So they have certain things, they call it vilaiti begana, which is the tomato. Certain ingredients that they don't use in today's cooking because it wasn't part of actually what Indian cuisine was before British or colonial times.
Let me ask you one question about
Yes.
the chappan bhog. Do they have the same prasad every day, or because finding 56 dishes every day? I think it's
Yeah, more or less the same 56 things. Some things will vary, but you can't imagine it's very much like a factory system there. Right? They have certain chefs that chop things, certain chefs that are in the kitchens with thousands of handis.
kitchen.
Yes, it's like a full-on catering company inside Jagannath's temple.
Yeah. And another thing I wanted to ask you about the Gujarat stage. See, normally when we say pakwan ya bhog, it is supposed to be made for God. But in this particular town, the most interesting part that they make this food for the dead person, which I found so interesting, because the bhog is for the dead person, not for the God. So why was it like that?
So another thing we really wanted to do in this book was expand the definition of food of the gods. It wasn't just bhog, which is offered to deities, and I think throughout India we all have our different definitions, and through these faiths have defined what food means. So for Meghalaya, again, the rice beer was actually being offered to spirits of life or ancestors. In Zoroastrian town, they were offering it to the souls of departed, and our morbid take was because in the faith, our souls are refining, and they're constantly refining so that we become closer to the ultimate being. I don't think we as humanity are there yet. We're going to take some more refining to do. So these souls are actually going to return back to us, and now they have food ready when they arrive.
Yeah, and the main difference, what I found was, in our typical Hindu religion, we normally make bhog especially for God, but we do make some pakwan or bhog when a person's, what we call it, shrad, and that's the time we cook only for the person who's no more with us. So that's why I found this very interesting, and it's difficult to accept, but if you see the feeling behind it, I think it's worth it.
Thank you. So we have the two last locations.
In
Kolkata, we have the Baghdadi Jews. And this one was a very dark feeling because it's a community that used to be in thousands. Right? They came to India looking for opportunity during the colonial times. And then as Israel opened up as a state, a lot of them started to move back. And so that community is only in like 20 people now. And so there's these 20 people that are fighting to preserve their culture, and they know it's going to end soon. They know they're the last generation, the last legs. And so what they're doing is to actually pass on the marks they've left into the community, through the synagogues, to the schools, through the iconic cemetery. They're trying to actually pass it into the local community so that it survives into the future. And we found out that they bought their food with us, right? And in their faith, they have this thing called the kosher diet, certain restrictions of what they can eat. And so when they landed in Kolkata, they actually had the local produce that blended in with that kosher diet. And so you had a very interesting evolution of dishes. My favorite one is that there's a restriction that you can't actually have meat and milk in one meal, in one dish. So what they had in plenty in Kolkata was coconut milk.
Yes.
And so they were able to circumvent this restriction and create new dishes like chutney, the sour tamarind gravy.
And I think in Kolkata, the staunch Bengalis are mainly fish eaters. So in all their religious ceremonies, they have fish, which is like even when the bride comes home, they have a fish for Kali Mata, they have this different kind of prasad. So food and milk is the two most important things in Konkan, which is very interesting.
So those diets, as well as what was available, kind of influenced and created a new cuisine of its own.
Yeah.
And then the last place, Ki Gompa in Spiti, absolutely beautiful. It was actually the first place we went on this journey. We got to spend a night freezing. It was me, Devang, and Tony, who was helping with the photography, and the three of us cuddled together to survive the night in this temple. I'm not kidding at all. It was freezing there. But what's iconic about this monastery is the child monks, and how food is very much a ritualistic practice. They wake up to one of the head monks blowing a conch shell, and then the child monks will come onto a balcony and they prepare pak, which is basically taking one of their refined grains and making little balls out of it.
Like laddu.
Yes, their version of laddu. And then we got to meet, it was a harvest season during this time. And harvest season comes with its festivities, and we got to meet this character who calls himself Chengiz Khan. And he taught us about there's these, in their faith, that they have these spirits that are still living around us. And so he makes moonshine in his house, and as part of the ritual ceremony of drinking moonshine is they lob a bit of ghee onto the rim of the glass and then drink it. And lastly, my favorite part was, we call them the momo making aunties of Chicham village. So we actually sat down with them and learned how they make momos, about their history, and the most interesting part was, whenever I show up, I end up stopping research and start eating. So I actually sat down with the aunties and started making momos. And they were singing filmy songs from the 80s, and they just started throwing my name into the filmy songs.
But all these songs, like if you see the wedding songs or the religious songs of Rajasthan, they incorporate everybody's name in that. So that person is mighty thrilled, oh, my name has been in that particular song. And momos, do they have any traditional filling, or what do they use for filling in momos?
So it's a mix of things. It's both non-veg and veg. But the interesting that they have here is it's called turpe. It's kind of like paneer, but not really. But it's like their version of cheese. And either you can have it fresh, which they have fresh in the momos, or they actually dry it up on the chuts. And when dry, it becomes like a chewing gum. And so they'll actually snack on this like a cheesy chewing gum throughout the day. So even like Spiti, they had such a robust diet. Even though it's an area that has brutal winters, it's an area that doesn't have much land for cultivation, right? So they've had to make the most of what they have in the area around them. And I think what people are most confused about when they open this book is that there's a mix of veg and non-veg and alcohol.
Yes.
Because all these cultures have evolved in terms of what faith and food means. In Spiti, they don't have much to work with. So non-veg actually became a very natural part of their diet. As Chengiz told us, he actually has like meat hanging and drying in his house because they need it for the winter months. Like this is what they need to survive in nutrition, or the winters will get even more brutal.
But I think we all should appreciate that the limited ingredients or the sources they have, they manage to make such wonderful pakwan for their gods, which is simply amazing. Because when we have plenty, like we do have in Maharashtra or any other parts of India, the availability is so much that we can make many things. But it's most difficult to make something with limited sources, limited raw ingredients. So I can really give them credit to their culinary skill or imagination, where they come up with such wonderful prasad to please their God.
Absolutely. Not only just pakwan, but I think food around the world, scarcity has actually pushed us
Yes.
to improve and see what the most we can do with dishes.
Yes.
My favorite tangent history is there's a dish in Korea, it's called budae. And during the Korean War, what happened was that there was so much scarcity that they only had scraps to work with. And so what they did was they took leftover tin cans of the armies, random meat and tidbits, and they combined it with whatever scrappings they could find to make this warm and heartwarming soup. And that soup is now a staple of the diet 50 years into the future. So scarcity really pushes what food can achieve. And some of the best dishes have come out of this.
Varun, you have given a number of interesting recipes in this book. I have gone through few of them, and I'm surely going to try a few of them.
The cicada chutney?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. And which is your favorite recipe? Which you kind of tried, or you recommended it to your friends that do try this? Which one out of the many recipes which you have written?
So that's difficult. My favorite one though in Meghalaya, during the Jom Cultivation Festival, this is the festival where they're actually sowing the seeds of harvest, they hosted a little feast for us. So again, rice beer in plenty. But it was called chicken and bamboo shoots. And what they do is they actually ferment bamboo in the village itself. And that bamboo offers a very tangy, light taste to food. So we were having this a dish that was very heavy in chicken and starch. They put rice powder, and that rice powder makes it glutinous in a way. But with the bamboo shoots, it became light at the same time. But I would also say one of the most interesting dishes was the cicada chutney. They call it the football insect because it only arrives every 4 years in the village because cicadas aren't always there. And what they simply do is just fry up these insects and put a little bit of namak. And it's kind of like, mungfali having with beer.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds scary, but I'm sure it must be delicious.
Yeah.
And any favorite story you have to tell our audience in your journey of the Northeast?
Yeah, I think if you read the book, you'll find that each community offered a lot of lessons, a lot of takeaways. It's about history, it's about culture, but it's also about us going on this journey and what we were able to learn from these people. I think overall, just one, the idea of getting out of our bubbles and the plurality of these cultures and cuisines in India is what makes India's history so beautiful. I think there's so much to explore here that it was heartwarming that these cultures took us in for the time there. Everyone to teach us about their faith and their food. Meghalaya though is always going to be a very special one to me because I never imagined that existing in India. Nestled in the hills of Meghalaya was this tribal village where rice beer flows forever, and it was just very heartwarming for them to take us in and just be a part of their life for a small amount of time.
I think with your information about the food and the culture of the Northeast, I am sure many of the youngsters here are going to plan to visit Meghalaya in this next vacation, especially to taste this amazing food and experiencing the culture and of course the rice wine, which doesn't make you drunk.
Yeah.
That is the best part of that rice wine, I think, rice beer, whatever it is. Now, when you wrote this book, what kind of approach you had? Like, what are the category of audiences you had in your mind who would be interested in this kind of writing? Did you think about it, or you just...
Honestly, no. Both the books I've worked on have been for myself. So after the day, I hope you do read it. But if you don't, I think making a book is such a difficult process, it's such a journey, that at the end of the day, if you aren't making it for yourself, it's very difficult to actually put it out into the world. So both the books, as I told you, I was on this journey on food and faith.
Yes.
And so that's why this book came out. We have just recently released my second book, me and Ayushi, who's illustrated. It's a graphic novel. It's called Chotu, and it takes place in 1947 Chandni Chowk. And it's inspired by the stories of my Nana growing up there and how the partition came to change the lives of people there. But as you'll see in both books, they're lighthearted. I'm a closeted Bollywood romantic. So in this book, I talk about crying while watching Ashoka for the first time. I have stories of how Albinus reminded us of Albus Dumbledore from Hogwarts. A blending of the things I like in my life. Same in Chotu, like the titles are called Jab Tak Rahega Alu and Kuch Hai Building. So it's very much a blending of Bollywood coming alive throughout my work. So I think I've made these books for me, and I think if you read it, you get a sense of who I am, my character, my personality, the journeys I've been on as well.
Yeah. So that's very honest confession, I should say, because I think a true author, he writes for himself, for his inner happiness, for his contentment, what he's doing in life. And it is up to the people how they react to it. But I'm sure your book is going to be a favorite.
Thank you.
I have gone through it. I'm definitely going to try some recipes. Now, my next question would be, what is next after Chiku?
So I'm addicted to writing now at this point. So I want to continue to write. And I think when it comes to food and the exploration of food, there's still a lot more to discover. So I want to continue pushing on that front. I want to continue pushing on the graphic novel front. It's a small market in India still, but graphic novels allow you to do a lot with a book because you have the visual component. So very much in Chotu, we were able to bring 1947 alive visually. And I think I want to try fiction out. So I think I run off into my cave most days. I mean, I'm an introvert, so I like being in my room. The lights are dim, and I'm just staring at a page. And so writing has just become much more than just a hobby for me at this point.
So, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Now it's time for interactions with our readers. So if anybody wants to have some questions with Varun, you're most welcome.
Varun,
Yes.
your session was excellent.
Thank you very much.
I'm an oncologist by profession. So what I have seen is that there is a lot of increase in the malignancy right now. And I strongly believe there is something to do with the food which we are eating. A lot of adulteration, a lot of fertilizers, a lot of colors. So what was your experience with these people, because they are very close to the nature? So I think their disease pattern might have been different, which we are getting as a urban lifestyle. So I want your take for this.
Yeah, absolutely. So one in Spiti, one of my favorite stories was the idea of, they have these grains, they're called black peas. And so like what we have, I mean, at least in Delhi, we're big on mutton, like we have peas as part of our diet. What they used to have was these black peas that was actually healthier, better for you, had more mineral content. But what's happened, because green peas has become such a cash crop in India, they've actually changed their infrastructure to accommodate the growing of these vegetables. So what's slowly happening in lots of places around India is that because there's certain sabjis that are popular, people have actually changed to not growing what's indigenous to the area and started doing according to demand. And so I think as consumers, we have to start keeping an eye out for what we're consuming so that we can actually drive the demand of these heartier, more nutritious things such as black peas. Chinese was telling us, like, they have it in plenty. They're more than happy to plant it. It's just they don't have the demand for it. And so us as consumers, we have to be looking at what we're actually eating, where it's actually coming from. And the hard part is that some of these things are going to be more costly for us because it isn't robust as green peas. But slowly, if we can actually change the demand of these things, then we can actually impact our own diets, and we can actually improve the sustainability of places such as Spiti, which is being impacted by fertilizers. And I mean, just geography, if somewhere up north, closer to the mountains, has fertilizers, all of that comes down to Delhi. And so the entire supply chain gets impacted.
Actually, on a serious note, I agree with you, sir, because if you see a simple thing like fruit, in our younger days, we used to have only seasonal fruits because we believe that mangoes are to be eaten in summer only because they bring out the best in men, because the weather conditions, the soil conditions, and there are many other fruits which we ate according to the season. But now you see, all the fruits are available throughout the year. So it is some kind of commercial rat race, where they want to have this kind of food. And if you see Meghalaya or the Northeast, they are so rich in their natural resources. So I think the food which they make doesn't have any chemical fertilizers or anything, no preservation. So I think they come out best.
We ate a lot
Yes.
making this book, and you feel better. Like we still felt good after those meals. I mean, it's anecdotal, but it's a testament to the food there at these locations are definitely better for you. And I want to drive home. It comes to us as consumers to actually drive what people are going to make, because the farmers in Spiti aren't going to change their crops according to what is better for them. They're going to change to what makes more money. Yes.
Any other?
Yeah, I have a question. So, do you believe that there is one God? So, if there is one God, why can't there be one pakwan for all?
Very interesting question.
Why do we have to have different varieties of
If
food
there was
for all?
only one
I want to ask Bharat that did you, after coming, since you're an Indian at heart, did you ever wonder why in Maharashtra we have only laddus for modak for Ganesh ji, or up in the north? I'm still wondering why is it so? Not because of what is available.
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you. And so it's like what was available in plenty. Like in Goa you have cashews, so cashews become part of the diet. It becomes a thickener in gravies. Versus in different areas we use different type of thickeners for things, and so it's availability. On the religion question, it's going to take a lot of time to answer. I touch upon it about the book. I tell people I'm agnostic, but I think I'm a lot more spiritual than people would take me for. I just don't follow one discipline. As my food, I like to pick and choose and take a little bit from everywhere.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think being religious does not mean that you should not have a non-veg prasad. It's up to you, how you believe, and you cannot change that. And in India, we certainly can't change. So
One last question.
one more question.
My question was, if you want to give a suggestion to youngsters to start a journey what you have written in this book and to explore the food, so what will be your suggestions to youngsters?
So a very important note I got from my editor was give me more of you in the book. And I had to spend about 2 weeks in my little cave rewriting a lot of the book to impart who I was as a person, and that's where a lot of the stories I think readers have enjoyed, as embarrassing as they are for me to actually put into a book. I think having your voice, even in something as food writing, becomes very important. And so with the writing of the food, find something that you can evoke yourself and your personality. And I think something that you have to really try hard for is not to use the words of others. And be careful how much research you do beforehand. I did a ton of research before jumping into this book, and then we arrived on location to find everything was completely different. And so you have to be open to and receptive to those new experiences and work hard to put that lens in your own words. I think that's a very important step as writers, like not to use the words and experiences of other people, because with the internet you have all these bloggers, you have so much information out there, to experience it on your own. Thank you. Sorry, yes.
Welcome to Nagpur World. I'd like to throw some light on your experience of cheesemongering and Asura.
Okay.
Like it's part of travelogue. And which country apart from India has this vibrant food culture?
Oh yeah, I mean, tons. I personally love Japan. I think, again, the food and the culture that comes with food there is absolutely fascinating. But what I did was, traveling is expensive. And quitting your job and traveling isn't something everyone can do. And so for me to make it sustainable, I had to pick up odd jobs along the way. I bartended in Peru. This isn't an exaggeration. I was actually working at a hostel and spending my nights behind the bar. But I got to learn about Peruvian alcohol. I got to learn about Chilcano and how to make pisco sours. I spent 4 months working in a hostel in Argentina, and on the roof of the hostel they had a little grill, and so that's how I learned about Argentinian barbecue. And I worked on a cow farm in Chile where I got to spend 2 weeks learning how to milk cows. Turns out farm work is actually less about the animals and more about clearing grass. And so it became a lot of actually field work, but through that experience I got to spend New Year's with a family in Chile and experience how they experience the holidays and have their food. So it was through a little bit of everything that I think I got to find out food was a lens into the lives that these people were living.
One last question. Very famous for coffee as well. So how was the experience with it? Coffee specifically?
We had a lot of rice. I don't remember having coffee.
On behalf of VLF, sir, we wish to gift you with a book and a token of our appreciation for spending time with us. The gift has been sponsored by Sony OfficeMate, manufacturer and exporter of quality stationery products. The gift kit also contains the book titled Bonsai by Mr. Bhagwan Prakash. He will be gifting the hamper to you. I also have a painting by Riddhi Vikanshi, who would like to gift her painting to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you to VLF, the patrons, the volunteers, and everyone in the audience for making this. And thank you very much, Ms. Soni. Amazing introduction. Amazing to sit with you yesterday.
Yes, thank you so much. I think you enjoyed it as much as I did.
Readers, please note, our author is available for interaction downstairs at the lawn. His book is also available for sale and signing at the crossword downstairs.
A suggestion has come from audience that, as he says, he's a very romantic person. So his next book should be on Bollywood. Bollywood. I think it will be very easy for him.
What stars?
This is very Bollywood. Our favorite food of the Bollywood star, especially the heroines.